tonight, Santa Claus is not feeling festive. He is cold, overworked, and buried under an endless mountain of kids' wishes, while the weather throws rain at the North Pole just to be rude. The elves are scheduling his size, the reindeer are negotiating snack reliability, and Christmas Eve is approaching like a deadline with jingles. But Santa has a secret plan. Deliver Christmas fast and clean, then vanish to a warm beach with a cold beer and absolutely no letters. Settle in for a calm, sarcastic bedtime drama where the magic still happens, but Santa really wants a day off. Chapter 1. The Inbox of Eternal Winter. The North Pole had a talent for being the same on purpose. The sky did not really brighten so much as it switched from dark to slightly less dark, like a tired employee clocking in and pretending to feel motivated. Snow filled every gap, softened every edge, and made time feel padded. The wind added its own commentary, sliding along the workshop walls with a thin whistle that suggested it had opinions about management. Santa Claus sat at his desk and tried to remember the last time he had enjoyed the sound of paper. The desk was large, carved from old wood that had travelled through centuries of hands and winters. It was also completely buried. Letters stacked like a geological formation. Lists slid from one pile to another, forming little avalanches of hope. Some envelopes were decorated with glitter that had migrated onto everything, including Santa, who now sparkled in the most undignified way possible. He held done letter gently, as if it might bite. The handwriting was careful and round, like a child had practiced being polite. The request was sweet. The request was reasonable. The request was also the 97th version of the same request he had read that morning, which was impressive because it was still early, or late, or whatever time meant in a place where the sun took frequent personal days. Santa sighed in the slow, calm way that suggested he was trying not to sigh. On the wall behind him, a calendar hung with the month of December displayed like a countdown clock. Each day was boxed, each box filled with small notes and tiny reminders. Check sleigh runners, confirm cocoa supply, review flight lanes, replace bell on harness number 5. Practice laughing in case of unexpected cameras. It was the kind of schedule a person made when that person could not admit that their entire job was long annual panic disguised as tradition. Santa stared at the box that mattered most, Christmas Eve. He looked away quickly, as if the date might notice and become louder. There was a gentle knock at the door, followed by the sound of someone entering anyway. The door opened and an elf walked in with a clipboard that looked larger than the elf. The elf wore a green sweater, red scarf, and the expression of someone who had been promoted into responsibility without being asked. Santa did not ask the elf to sit, because sitting would imply time, and time would imply progress, and progress would imply he was not still at the beginning of the letter mountain. The elf cleared their throat. The sound was very small. The message behind it was not. "Morning check-in," said the elf. "Production is stable. Toy Line 3 has recovered from the incident." Santa raised an eyebrow. "The incident?" The elf nodded as if read his thoughts. "The teddy bears had a brief emotional phase. They are being gentle again. Also, the new sled prototype is not on fire anymore." Santa nodded with the careful calm of a man who had heard much worse. "Good. Not on fire is always a nice improvement." The elf tapped the clipboard. "Reindeer are requesting a meeting later. They said it is urgent." Santa kept his face neutral, which took practice. Reindeer meetings were never urgent in the way humans meant urgent. Reindeer urgent could mean a serious harness issue, or it could mean someone had looked at someone the wrong way near the carrot storage. "Tell them I will be they," Santa said. The elf hesitated. "Also, there is the matter of the wish-sorting backlog." Santa looked down at the letter in his hand, then at the desk, then at the room, then at the universe. "Yes," Santa said with calm sincerity. "I have noticed the backlog." The elf made a note that did not help. The elf glanced toward the window, where snow drifted sideways like it was trying to escape. Then the elf looked back at Santa with a kind of gentle concern that made Santa feel slightly guilty, which was unfair, because guilt was something he typically reserved for people who forgot the reindeer feed order. The elf lowered their voice. "Are you all right?" Santa smiled, the famous smile, the one that comforted children and convinced adults to behave in shopping malls. It was a nice smile. It was also a mask he could wear without thinking. "I am all right," he said. The elf did not look fully convinced, but elves were trained to keep the machine moving, so they nodded. "Great. There is also a small request from the packaging team. They would like fewer bows this year because bows have become emotionally complicated." Santa nodded again. Understood. Fewer bows, anything else. The elf visibly relaxed, as if the world had been put back in its proper order. They left the room, closing the door softly. Santa sat alone with his letters. He opened another envelope. The wish list inside was short, neat, and optimistic. It asked for a toy train, a warm hat, and for Santa to please take care of himself. Santa stared at that last line for a long moment, then set the letter down like it was heavier than the rest. Take care of himself. That was a good idea. It was also vague. The North Pole was full of vague good ideas that never made it into the schedule. Drink more water. Rest when you can. Do not let the reindeer eat the ribbon again. All simple, all impossible. Santa reached for a mug of cocoa, but the cocoa was cold. He took a sip anyway because quitting small routines felt like the first step toward quitting everything. The workshop outside his office hummed with the quiet energy of thousands of small hands moving in patterns. Conveyor belts rolled, bells chimed now and then. Somewhere an elf laughed, then another elf told him to keep it down because laughter could disrupt the counting process. Santa leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a second. In the darkness behind his eyelids he saw a beach. It was ridiculous. It was also immediate. The image arrived with the clarity of a dream that had been waiting for him. Warm sand, pale sunlight, water that moved without trying to freeze, palm leaves shifting lazily, a chair with a towel draped over it, a cold beer sweating in the heat, just sitting there, asking nothing. Santa opened his eyes and found the North Pole still doing what it always did, which was to exist loudly. He had not always felt this bored. There had been centuries where the work felt like a miracle. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. He remembered the early years, when he had been dud man on one journey carrying small gifts with careful hands. He remembered the way people had looked at a simple gesture as if it was sunlight. He remembered the first time he had heard a child laugh and realized it could travel through walls. Now he was running a global operation with a performance review from the weather. He picked up another letter. A child wanted a pony. Santa made a note in the margin. Explain to parents. He picked up another letter. A child wanted their family to stop arguing. Santa stared at that, feeling the weight behind the neat handwriting. He set it in a special pile. There were many special piles now. Easy wishes, hard wishes, wishes that were really question, wishes that sounded like prayers, wishes that were just lists of brand names copied from somewhere, which made Santa feel like he was being used as a delivery service for marketing. He rubbed his forehead and listened to the wind. A soft knock came again. This time the door opened to reveal Mrs. Claus. She carried a tray, which meant she was either being kind or preparing to make a point. On the tray was a fresh mug of cocoa, a small plate of cookies, and something else, a folded paper with clean edges. She set the tray down without speaking. Then she sat across from him and looked at him like she could see right through his beard, right into his thoughts, and possibly into the beach scene as well. "You are staring at the letters like they are personally insulting you," she said. Santa did not deny it. "The letters are many." Mrs. Claus glanced around at the stacks. Many is a gentle word. He took a sip of the new cocoa. It was warm. He felt his shoulders drop by a fraction. It was annoying how much that helped. Mrs. Claus nodded toward the folded paper. That arrived this morning. Santa unfolded it. The paper was not a letter, it was a report. The top line read, "Seasonal Logistics Forecast," in neat elf handwriting. Santa skimmed it. The numbers and notes danced in his tired head. Increased precipitation risk, unstable jet streams, higher chance of rain in northern routes, elevated turbulence in coastal zones, recommendation, reinforce sleigh coverings and pack extra de-icing supplies. Santa lowered the paper. Rain, he said, as if tasting the word. Mrs. Claus sipped her own tea. Rain is fashionable now. Even the sky is trying new things. Santa looked back at the calendar. Christmas Eve waited in its box. Mrs. Claus watched him quietly. Then she said, "You are thinking about quitting." Santa blinked. "I am not thinking about quitting." Mrs. Claus raised an eyebrow. "You are thinking about something that feels like quitting." Santa opened his mouth, then closed it. It was difficult to argue with a person who had known him through centuries and still managed to be unimpressed by his dramatic moods. He sighed. "I am thinking about a beach." Mrs. Claus smiled, small and knowing. "Of course you are." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the walls could gossip. "I am bored." Mrs. Claus did not laugh. She did not scold. She just nodded slowly, as if boredom was a normal thing to confess. "That is allowed," she said. "But you still have work." Santa stared at the letters. "I know." Mrs. Claus reached across the desk and tapped the special pile, the one with the hard wishes. "This is why you keep doing it," she said. Santa looked at that pile and felt a familiar twist in his chest. It was not guilt exactly. It was responsibility, the heavy kind that did not go away with sleep. Mrs. Claus leaned back. "But," she added, "that does not mean you cannot rest. It means you have to be clever about it." Santa looked up. "Clever." Mrs. Claus stood, took the tray, and before leaving she placed a cookie directly in his hand. "Eat," she said. Then read 3 more letters. "Then stand up and stretch. You are not a statue." Santa held the cookie like it was a contract. Mrs. Claus paused at the door. "Also," she said, "you have been sighing louder than usual. The elves are starting to take it personally." Santa gave a weak smile. "I will sigh more quietly." She left. Santa ate the cookie. It tasted like butter and sugar and the stubborn love of someone who refused to let him fall apart. He read 3 letters. Then he read a 4th, because he could not help himself. Then he stood up and stretched, because he had promised, and because his back had begun to feel like a separate entity with its own complaints. He walked to the window and looked out across the snow. In the distance, the reindeer barn sat low against the wind. A faint sound drifted across the yard, a mix of snorting and hoof thumps, and what sounded suspiciously like arguing. Santa rubbed the bridge of his nose. The reindeer wanted a meeting, the weather wanted a fight, the letters wanted everything, and somewhere in his mind a beach waited with patient sunlight. He turned away from the window, returned to his desk, and pulled a fresh blank page toward him. He dipped his pen and wrote a title at the top in careful letters. A plan. The plan was not a detailed plan yet. It was a dream that wanted to become practical. It started with a simple idea that felt both selfish and necessary. Finish Christmas fast. He paused, then underlined it. He added a second line, then disappear to somewhere warm. He stared at the words and felt a small spark of rebellion. It was ridiculous. It was also the first thing that had made him feel awake all morning. He could not skip Christmas. That was not who he was. But he could change the shape of it. He could shave time off the edges. He could streamline. He could delegate. He could take quiet day after, just one, and sit on sand with a beer and no expectations. Santa smiled to himself, small and private. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, unimpressed. Santa picked up another letter and began again, but now, beneath the boredom, there was a thin thread of purpose. Not the purpose of doing the job, but the purpose of surviving it with something left over. He would be clever about rest. He would try. Chapter 2. The Elves Introduce Process Improvements. The meeting room was warm by North Pole standards, which meant it was only slightly colder than a polite refrigerator. A large table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs sized for elves, but strong enough to handle the rare occasion when Santa joined them and made the furniture regret its life choices. Elves filed in with clipboards, notebooks, and mugs of cocoa. They had the quiet energy of people who cared deeply about getting things right, and were also fully aware that getting things right was the main reason the world did not fall into chaos. At the head of the table stood an elf with tidy hair and a sweater that looked freshly ironed. This elf was named Ino, which was a name that sounded calm, but the way Ino held the clipboard suggested calm was a choice made through discipline. Ino tapped the table gently. "Thank you for coming. Today we discuss the wish-sorting backlog and our proposed improvements." Santa sat near the end of the table like a visiting relative who might say something unexpected. He nodded politely and tried to look engaged. He was engaged. He just wished engagement came with less paperwork. Ino continued. "We will begin with a brief overview of current issues." An elf on the left raised a hand. "The glitter is in the sorting bins again." Ano made a note without emotion. "Glitter is always in the sorting bins. We will address glitter later." Another elf raised a hand. "Some letters are arriving wet due to increased rain along shipping routes." Ano nodded. "Weather is developing a personality this year." Santa tried not to smile. It was the kind of sarcasm that made him feel less alone. Ano looked at Santa. "Santa, would you like to share any thoughts on the situation?" Santa cleared his throat. "I have many thoughts. Most of them are tired." A small sympathetic chuckle moved through the room, quickly contained. Santa added, "We read the letters, we honor the letters, we cannot drown in the letters." Ano nodded as if Santa had confirmed a policy statement. "Exactly." Ano lifted a sheet of paper and held it up. "Proposal 1, a revised sorting framework." The elves leaned forward. Santa leaned forward too, mostly because he suspected a revised sorting framework meant someone had created more categories. Ano spoke steadily. "Currently we sort by region and urgency. We propose adding a new layer, emotional complexity." Santa blinked. "Emotional complexity?" Ano nodded. "Some wishes are simple, some are logistical, some are emotional. We lose time when emotional wishes are treated like logistical ones. They require different handling." Santa looked down at his special piles and felt a strange mix of pride and annoyance. He had already done this informally, which meant it was about to become official, which meant it was about to require training and charts. An elf on the right spoke up. "We created a scale." "Of course you did," Santa thought. Ano continued. "Scale level 1 is simple requests, toys, clothes, books. Scale level 2 is skill support, requests like help me learn, help me practice, help me be brave. Scale level 3 is family and community, requests like please stop the fighting, please be safe, please come home." The room quieted. Even the mugs stopped moving. Santa nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable." Ano made another note. "Good. Proposal 2. We reduce duplication." An elf flipped open a binder thick enough to be used as a doorstop. "Many children request the same popular items. We can pre-approve batches." Santa raised an eyebrow. "Pre-approve?" Ano gestured. "We are not removing your role. We are reducing your repetitive reading. You still read. But instead of reading 10,000 versions of the same toy request, you read a representative sample and approve a production plan." Santa considered it. This was dangerously close to common sense. He said cautiously, "That might help." Ano nodded, as if they had expected that. Proposal 3. We introduce a calm shift schedule for you. Santa blinked again. "A schedule for me?" Ano held Santa gaze with the bravery of an elf who had decided to manage the unmanageable. "You have been reading letters for too many hours. Your attention is fading. Your sighing is increased. We have evidence." An elf slid a small chart across the table. It was a graph of Santa's sigh frequency by hour. Santa stared at it. He could not decide whether to be offended or impressed. Ano spoke gently. "We propose reading blocks. 2 hours readed, then a break, then another block. You eat, you stretch, you walk, you see daylight." Santa opened his mouth to argue, then remembered the North Pole version of daylight and decided the argument was weak. He said, "I do not like being managed." Ano nodded. "We know." That is why we are doing it carefully." A soft ripple of contained laughter moved through the room. Santa felt heat rise in his cheeks, which was an unusual sensation in a place built of snow. He rubbed his beard. "I appreciate the effort," he said. Aino placed the chart down. "There is also the matter of distribution." Santa leaned in. "Now we are talking." Distribution was where time went to disappear. Aino flipped to another page. "Weather forecasts suggest higher turbulence and more rain. We propose route adjustments and additional coverage." Santa nodded. The sleigh tarp, an elf on the left, grimaced. "The tarp is not magical enough. Rain gets in, toys get damp, letters get damp, cookies get damp, the morale gets damp." Santa sighed softly, then remembered he was being measured. He stopped. Aino continued. "We propose a layered covering system and a reindeer comfort plan." Santa glanced toward the window. "Reindeer comfort plan sounds like a meeting." An elf raised a hand. "We have already begun drafting it." Aino nodded. "Reindeer are highly skilled partners. They are also dramatic. We will address their needs to reduce delays." Santa murmured, "Bless you." Aino heard him anyway. "We accept your blessing." Santa leaned back and let the meeting wash over him. It was strange. It was comforting. The elves cared. They were trying. They were building systems not to trap him, but to hold him up. In the middle of Aino describing a new stamping process for letters that required special attention, Santa drifted again to the beach. It appeared in his mind like a quiet scene on a screen. Warmth, slow waves, a chair that did not need a clipboard, a bottle of beer in his hand, not because he was escaping, but because he was allowed to be someone who was not always working. He pictured himself that, beard slightly damp from salt air instead of snow. He pictured the sound of wind that did not feel like a complaint. Aino's voice pulled him back. "Santa, do you approve the pilot program?" Santa blinked, then cleared his throat. "I approve the pilot program." Aino nodded. "Excellent. Implementation begins immediately." Santa felt a small jolt of panic. "Immediately." Aino continued, calm as ever. "We have prepared training materials. We will begin with letter triage teams and a revised intake procedure." An elf passed out small packets. The packets were labeled in simple text. "Letter handling, version 3. Santa accepted a packet and held it like it might dissolve him into a cloud of policy. He looked around at the elves. They were earnest. They were focused. They were also quietly excited, because elves love two things more than cocoa: helping people and making processes better. Santa realized something uncomfortable. The elves were not just helping him do the job, they were helping him stay alive inside it. Aino finished the presentation and closed the binder with a satisfying thump. "Any questions?" An elf raised a hand. "Will Santa follow the break schedule?" All eyes moved to Santa, bright and curious. Santa looked at the faces around the table. Small faces, sharp eyes, hands that had made millions of toys and fixed millions of small mistakes. They had carried the operation when he was tired. They had held the line when the world demanded magic on a deadline. He swallowed. "Yes," he said, "I will follow the break schedule." Aino nodded once, as if recording a solemn oath. "Thank you." The meeting ended in a wave of motion. Elves gathered papers, adjusted scarves, and formed clusters that immediately began discussing implementation details. Someone mentioned color coding. Someone else suggested a new sticker system. Someone suggested banning glitter, and 3 elves gasped like that was sacrilege. Santa stood slowly and stepped out into the workshop. The main floor was a controlled storm of activity. Conveyors moved, bells chimed, elves walked briskly with purpose. The air smelled like pine, cocoa, and warm wood. Somewhere, a toy drum began to play itself, then stopped when an elf gave it a stern look. Santa walked through the aisles, nodding at workers, accepting small reports, saying thank you more times than he could count. He was Santa after all. Gratitude was part of the uniform. He reached a quiet corner where a small window looked out over the yard. Snow drifted and swirled. The reindeer barn stood steady. The sky looked heavy with more weather it had not earned. Santa rested his hand on the window frame and exhaled. Behind him, a familiar voice spoke, gentle and amused. "You are trying to escape in your head again." Santa turned to see Mrs. Claus. She carried a notebook and wore the calm expression of someone who had just heard about the psi chart and had decided not to bring it up yet. Santa gave a tired smile. "I was not escaping. I was evaluating warmth." Mrs. Claus nodded. "Scientific research." Santa looked out again. "The elves have plans." Mrs. Claus stepped beside him. "The elves always have plans. The question is whether you will let them work." Santa stared at the snow. "I said yes to brakes." Mrs. Claus smiled. A historic moment. Santa glanced at her. "Do you think I can finish early?" Mrs. Claus considered it, thoughtful. "Early is a complicated word, but you can finish well, and you can finish without turning into a grumpy snow statue." Santa let that settle. The soft tension in his chest eased slightly. The job was still enormous. The calendar was still moving, but the weight felt shared now, distributed across many capable hands. He pictured the beach again, but this time he did not cling to it like an escape hatch. He held it like a reward, something earned, something placed at the far end of effort. Mrs. Claus nudged him lightly. "Break," she said. "Your schedule says you are due." Santa gave a soft laugh. "I have a schedule now." "Yes," she said, "and the elves will enforce it." Santa made a face. "That feels threatening." Mrs. Claus smiled. "It is love," she said. "It is just organized." Santa nodded slowly. Organized love. That sounded like the entire North Pole. He turned away from the window and started walking back toward his office. The letters waited. The piles did not shrink by themselves. The reindeer meeting loomed like a dramatic cloud. But under the boredom, something shifted. A plan existed now, supported by elves who believed in systems, and by a partner who believed in him. Santa reached his desk and sat down. He opened the packet labeled Letter Handling, version 3. It was detailed, it was efficient, it was annoyingly sensible. He took a sip of cocoa, then picked up the next letter. Outside, the wind continued its commentary. Inside, Santa worked, a little steadier, with the quiet thought that after Christmas, after the last gift and the last rooftop, he might finally trade snow for sand. Chapter 3. The Reindeer Are Not Seasonal Equipment. The reindeer barn was warm in the way that made sense only to reindeer. It smelled like hay, leather, snow, and the particular confidence that comes from knowing the entire holiday depends on your legs. The barn lights were soft and low, designed to keep everyone calm, which was optimistic because reindeer could turn a quiet afternoon into a dramatic event with the dedication of professional performers. Santa stepped inside and immediately heard the sound of hooves shifting in irritation. Rudolph stood near the center, head slightly lifted, red nose glowing with a gentle pulse that made the shadows dance. Dasher and Dancer were near the feed bins, pretending they were not listening. Prancer was listening very loudly. Vixen was chewing something with the slow patience of someone chewing through a problem. Comet and Cupid stood together, looking like they had rehearsed their expressions in a mirror. Donner and Blitzen were near the harness racks, both radiating a level of unimpressed that could have frozen water. Santa paused, adjusted his coat, and tried to look like a calm leader who definitely had everything under control. He had learned over the years that the reindeer could sense panic the way humans sense smoke. If he showed even a hint of worry, they would either rise to the challenge or turn it into a negotiation. Either way, it would take time. Rudolph took a slow step forward, acting as spokesperson, which was fair. When you had a glowing nose, people expected leadership, even when you wanted a quiet life. "We would like to begin," Rudolph said with a general statement. Santa nodded. "Please do." Rudolph lifted his chin. "We are not seasonal equipment." Santa kept his face serious. "Understood." Donna snorted. "You say understood, but then you store us next to the spare bells like we are decorative." Santa opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it. He had in fact stored spare bells in the same room as the reindeer blankets last spring. It had seemed efficient at the time. Mrs. Claus says efficiency is love, Santa said. Blitzen stomped once. If that is love, then love is loud and cold. Vixen continued chewing. We have a list. Of course you do, Santa thought. Everyone at the North Pole had lists. Lists were the local language. Prancer stepped forward and produced a folded sheet of paper from somewhere that suggested reindeer had pockets, which was a troubling concept. Prancer unfolded the paper carefully, like an attorney about to present evidence. Item hair, Prancer said. Harness comfort. Santa glanced toward the harness racks, where straps hung in neat loops. They looked fine. They always looked fine. Then the night came and suddenly everything rubbed in places that should not be rubbed. Rudolph spoke calmly. The shoulder padding is worn. Santa nodded. We will replace it. Dancer lifted a hoof. The belly strap pinches when we turn sharply. Santa made a note in his mind, then realized he needed an actual note, because reindeer complaints multiplied if you relied on memory. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. He had begun carrying it everywhere, which felt like a personal defeat. Noted, Santa said. Comet flicked an ear. Also, the bell arrangement. It is not balanced. It makes us feel uneven. Santa blinked. You feel uneven? Comet nodded solemnly. Yes. Cupid added, it makes our rhythm sad. Santa wrote that down too, because you never knew which complaint was metaphor and which was a real physical issue. At the North Pole it was often both. Prancer cleared his throat, which was unnecessary because reindeer throats were already dramatic. Item 2. Snack scheduling. At the word snack scheduling, every reindeer perked up. Santa tried to keep his tone neutral. You have snacks. Dasher stepped forward. We have snacks, yes, but we do not have snack reliability. Santa nodded slowly. Snack reliability. Donna said, Last week the carrot supply arrived late. That was unacceptable. Blitzen added, and someone replaced the usual apples with pears. Pears are not a substitute. Pears are a surprise. We do not like surprises. Santa looked at Rudolph. Were you all going to mention this sooner? Rudolph gave a small, patient smile. We are mentioning it now. Santa wrote snack reliability in his notebook. I will speak to supply. Vixen stopped chewing long enough to speak. Also, we want warm water, not cold water that tastes like regret. Santa nodded. Warm water. Prancer glanced at the paper again. Item 3. Weather respect. That made Santa laugh. A quiet burst that he quickly softened into a cough. Weather respect. Rudolph watched him without blinking. Yes. Santa gestured toward the barn wall. I cannot control the weather. Donna said, you control the schedule. Blitzen said, you decide when we train. Comet said, you choose the routes. Cupid said, you say it will be fine. Vixen resumed chewing. It is not always fine. Santa exhaled slowly. The forecast says rain. The reindeer reacted as if Santa had said the word dentist. Dasher lowered his head. Rain is heavy. Dancer said rain is cold. Prancer said rain makes the harness smell sad. Santa held up a hand. We are adjusting. The elves are working on coverings. We will have more blankets. Rudolph tilted his head. We would like to see the blankets before we agree to fly through rain. Soft tension settled into the barn like mist. Santa felt it in his shoulders. This was the problem with running a magical operation. The magic was real, but it still depended on bodies and moods and trust. If the reindeer were unhappy, no amount of tradition could drag the sleigh through the sky on time. Santa nodded once. Fair. He stepped closer to the harness racks and reached for one harness. It was worn in familiar places, softened by use, but also stretched thin by years of urgent nights. He ran his hands along the strap and found a rough edge that could have rubbed. He could imagine it, a small irritation becoming a big distraction mid-flight. Santa turned back to them. We do a fitting today. Not later. Today. Donna blinked, surprised. Blitzen looked suspicious, as if immediate action might be a trick. Santa continued. We adjust straps, replace padding, and test balance. Then we test the new coverings. Then we decide training schedule based on weather and your comfort. Rudolph watched him carefully. And snacks. Santa nodded. And snacks. The reindeer murmured among themselves, a chorus of snorts and hoof shifts that sounded like a committee reaching a tentative agreement. Prancer folded the list with great satisfaction. "We will cooperate," Prancer said, "but with dignity." Santa gave a small smile. "Of course, with dignity." The fitting began in a surprisingly orderly way, which meant it was only mildly chaotic. Elves arrived with toolkits and fabric rolls, moving quickly and quietly, clearly relieved to have a concrete problem to solve. Aino appeared in the barn doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning everything with the calm intensity of someone watching a delicate machine. "We have replacement padding," Aino said. "Also, we have a proposed bell rebalancing plan." Comet perked up. "A plan?" Aino nodded. "A plan." Santa watched as elves worked around the reindeer with gentle hands. They measured straps, checked buckles, replaced worn sections, and added soft padding. They did it with the kind of care normally reserved for fragile toys and important instruments. Rudolph stood still, dignified, while an elf adjusted his harness. His nose glowed steadily, lighting the elf face in warm red. "You are very calm," Santa said softly to Rudolph. Rudolph blinked. "I have learned that if I am not calm, the others will panic." Santa nodded. "That sounds familiar." Rudolph tilted his head. "You seem tired." Santa hesitated. He could lie, he could pretend. But Rudolph had guided them through storms. He had earned honesty. "I am tired," Santa admitted. "I am also bored." Rudolph's ears twitched, as if trying to understand the second part. Bored. Santa stared at the harness strap in his hands. "It is the same every year, the letters, the lists, the cold, the deadlines. It matters, but I am still bored." Rudolph considered that. Then he said, "Perhaps you need a new reward." Santa let out a quiet laugh. "I was thinking about a beach." Rudolph nodded solemnly, as if beach was a serious strategic concept. Warm sand, good visibility, low turbulence. Santa smiled. "Exactly." Rudolph said, "If you want the beach, you must keep us comfortable. We are your wings." Santa met Rudolph's gaze and nodded once. Understood. By late afternoon, the harnesses were improved, the bells were balanced according to Comet and Cupid standards, and the snack supply had been audited like it was a critical resource, which it was. The elves produced warm water in insulated containers, and the reindeer drank with deep satisfaction. Blitzen finished a long drink and sighed. "Better." Donna said, "Now we talk training." Santa pulled out his notebook. "Yes, training." Aino stepped forward. "Weather window tomorrow looks stable over Finnish Lapland. Light snow, low wind, minimal rain risk." Santa felt relief that was almost embarrassing. He did not want to fly in rain any more than they did. He liked snow. Snow was predictable. Snow had rules. Rain was chaos with a wet attitude. "We do a test run tomorrow," Santa said. "Short flight, over Lapland. We practice with new coverings and adjusted harnesses." Prancer lifted his head. "And if it rains?" Santa paused. "If it rains, we return. No heroic nonsense, no forcing it." The reindeer stared at him. Then Dasher said quietly, "That is a good answer." Santa was surprised by how good it felt to hear that. The next day, the yard outside the workshop was lit by a pale morning that looked like it had been borrowed from somewhere else. The sleigh stood ready, runners polished, lanterns secured, coverings layered and tied down. Elves moved around it with quiet precision. Aino checked items off a list with a pen that seemed to write in straight lines only. Santa stepped into the sleigh and settled his coat around him. The reindeer lined up, harnessed and breathing steadily. Their breath rose in soft clouds, the sound of it mixing with the distant hum of the workshop. "Ready?" Rudolph asked. Santa looked at them. Their ears were forward, their posture was strong, their eyes were alert but not anxious. "As ready as I will ever be," Santa said. The takeoff was smooth, a clean lift into the air that always felt like a small miracle no matter how many times he had done it. The yard fell away, the workshop lights shrinking into a warm cluster against the endless white. The sleigh moved north and east, gliding into open sky. Below them, Finland spread out in muted winter colors. Snow covered forests and lakes. Dark trees stood like ink strokes against pale ground. Here and there, small lights suggested homes, quiet and steady, holding their own warmth against the season. Santa felt his shoulders loosen. The reindeer flew with practiced rhythm. The sleigh responded smoothly. The new coverings did not flap or strain. The bells rang with balanced, gentle music which made Comet look pleased even from the front. They passed over the region of Lapland, and Santa could not help thinking of Rovaniemi, a real place that had built itself around the idea of him. It was strange to be both myth and logistical challenge. People wanted Santa to be a story and a business and a symbol all at once. Meanwhile, Santa just wanted his harness team comfortable and his cocoa warm. The flight stayed calm for a while, then the sky changed its mind. At first it was subtle, a slight dimming, a shift in wind direction, a thin whisper of moisture in the air that did not belong to snow. Aino had said minimal rain risk. The weather had heard that and taken it as a personal insult. Santa felt the first cold droplets hit the sleigh covering, light at first, then more persistent. That heavy rain but a slushy mix, like winter trying to imitate autumn and failing. Rudolph's ears flicked back. Santa felt the team tighten, not in panic, but in alert readiness. Santa leaned forward. We turned back. Rudolph gave a short nod and adjusted course. The sleigh began to arc gently toward home. The slush thickened. It struck the covering with soft taps that turned into a steady drumming. The wind picked up, pushing sideways. The sleigh remained stable, but the air felt heavier, like it wanted to grab them. Donna snorted. Rain. Blitzen added, "This is the part we dislike." Santa called out, "Steady, we are returning." The reindeer held formation, their wings beat in strong rhythm. The bells rang, slightly muffled by wet air. Then a small problem appeared, quiet and annoying. One of the covering ties came roots. Santa heard it as a snap, then felt a flap of fabric. The covering lifted slightly, catching wind. It was not catastrophic. It was just the kind of thing that became catastrophic if ignored for too long. Santa cursed softly in his head, because his mouth had to remain calm. He reached behind him for the emergency tie kit, which the elves had packed with grim thoroughness. His fingers found rope and clips. He leaned over the side, careful not to shift weight too much, and grabbed the loose edge. The cold slush hit his gloves. The wind shoved. The sleigh dipped slightly. Rudolph glanced back, eyes sharp. Santa shouted, "I have it." He clipped the tie, pulled it tight, and secured it with a knot that had been learned over centuries of fixing things mid-flight. It held. The covering settled back into place. Santa exhaled. The reindeer steadied. The sleigh returned to smooth glide. They reached the North Pole yard under a sky that looked smug. The landing was controlled, slightly wet, and deeply satisfying. The reindeer stepped down, hooves crunching in snow that had turned dangerously slick. Elves rushed forward with towels and warm blankets as if welcoming heroes from battle, which was dramatic, because no one had been unalived, and yet the vibe suggested they had survived a grand trial. Aino approached Santa with the clipboard. Report. Santa wiped slush from his beard. Report. Weather is rude. Covering needs stronger ties. Reindeer performed excellently. Snacks remain critical. Aino nodded rapidly, writing. Reindeer feedback. Santa looked at the team. They stood with heads high, damp but steady. Rudolph shook off moisture, nose glowing brighter, lighting the wet air like a tiny beacon. Santa turned back to Aino. Reindeer are right. They are not equipment. They are partners. We adjust based of them. Aino nodded once. Agreed. The reindeer were led into the barn, where warm air and dry hay waited. Santa followed, stepping into the familiar smell and the calmer light. Rudolph looked at him. You returned quickly. Santa nodded. I promised, no forcing it. Donna said grudgingly, that was reasonable. Blitzen added, I still dislike rain. Santa smiled. I dislike it too. Rudolph stepped closer, voice low. The beach will feel better if you keep your promises. Santa felt something soften in his chest. He nodded. Then I will keep them. Chapter 4. Weather is having opinions this year. The North Pole woke up wet. Not fully wet, because the North Pole still wanted to be the North Pole, but wet in that subtle, insulting way where snow became slush and slush became slick, and everyone walked like they were trying not to admit they were nervous. Santa stepped outside the workshop and listened. Instead of the clean hush of snowfall, there was a faint patter. Tiny drops on wood, on metal, on the sleigh cover hung to dry. The sound was not loud, but it was persistent, like a person tapping a finger while waiting for you to fail. He looked up at the sky and saw a low grey ceiling that seemed to press down on everything. The clouds were not dramatic. They were worse than dramatic. They were bored clouds, the kind that did not care about your traditions. Santa stood still long enough for the cold to bite through his coat, then went back inside because there was no prize for suffering. In his office, the letters waited with their usual confidence. The piles were slightly smaller than before, which meant progress had happened, though at a speed that felt disrespectful. Santa sat down, took a sip of cocoa, and opened a report from Ino. The first line said, "Precipitation risk elevated." Santa sighed, then stopped himself, then sighed again quietly because he was still Santa and he still had lungs. A gentle knock came. Mrs. Claus entered carrying a scarf and an expression that suggested she had already heard the rain and had decided not to let it ruin her day. She draped the scarf over the back of his chair. "You look like you were arguing with the sky." Santa tapped the report. The sky started it. Mrs. Claus leaned closer to read. Elevated risk. Santa nodded. "We tested the coverings, we found weak points, we fixed them." The weather responded by changing its mood. Mrs. Claus sat across from him and folded her hands. "The weather has always had moods." Santa looked at her. "Not like this." Mrs. Claus considered that. Then she said, "The world changes. So does the sky. You cannot treat this like the old years." Santa stared at the calendar. Christmas Eve was closer now, the boxes shrinking like walls closing in. "I know." Mrs. Claus' voice softened. "How is the boredom?" Santa blinked. "How is the boredom?" Mrs. Claus nodded. "Yes." "Is it still there?" Santa looked at the letters. Some days it felt like a fog. Not sadness exactly, not anger, just a dullness, like his mind had to protect itself from the endless repetition. He answered honestly. "It is there, but the reindeer reminded me I can still choose how to do things." Mrs. Claus smiled. "Good." She stood and walked to the window in his office. The glass was slightly fogged by warmth inside. Outside, the yard gleamed wetly. Elves moved carefully, carrying boxes and tools, their boots slipping now and then. A worker paused to sprinkle grit on a slick patch like they were seasoning the ground. Mrs. Claus watched, then said, "They are adjusting well." Santa followed her gaze. "They are. They always do." Mrs. Claus turned back. "Then you adjust too." Santa did not respond immediately. He reached for another letter, but his fingers hesitated. He thought about his plan. Finish Christmas fast, then disappear somewhere warm. He had not told many people the plan in detail. It felt like a fragile secret, like admitting he wanted something for himself might cause the whole operation to wobble, but the weather was wobbling anyway. A knock came again, sharper this time. An elf entered, cheeks pink from cold. It was Ino. Ino spoke without preamble. "We have a problem." Santa gestured to the chair. "That is not new." Ino did not sit. "Rain is moving further north. It may reach the launch window." Santa leaned forward. "How much?" Ino flipped pages. "Models disagree. Some show light rain, some show heavy slush, some show mixed conditions. The wind at altitude is also unstable." Santa rubbed his forehead. "In other words, the weather is improvising." Ino nodded. "Yes." Mrs. Claus crossed her arms. "What is the proposed response?" Ino drew a breath. "The elves have developed a backup plan, a protective canopy with heated lining. It is not fully magical, but it is improved." Santa pictured the tarp and the ties and the slush. Heated lining sounds risky. Ino seemed to read his concern. It is low heat, regulated. It will reduce ice accumulation, keep the toys dry, and prevent cookie sog. Mrs. Claus lifted an eyebrow. Cookie Sog is serious. Ano nodded with solemn sincerity. Yes. Santa stood. Show me. They walked through the workshop to the staging area where the sleigh was being prepared. The air inside the building was warmer, filled with the smell of pine and glue and fresh paint. Elves moved with purpose, speaking in short, efficient phrases. In the staging area, the sleigh stood under a frame of fabric and straps. The new canopy hung above it like a tent, layered and quilted, with small seams that suggested careful engineering. It looked sturdy. It also looked like it might turn the sleigh into a moving blanket fort. An elf waved to Santa. We call it the Cozy Shield. Santa stared at it. Cozy Shield? The elf beamed. It is cozy. Santa looked at Ino. Is it shield? Ino nodded. In theory. Santa stepped closer and touched the fabric. It was soft on the inside, with a faint warmth like a heated scarf. It was not hot, just gently comforting. He could see how it might help. Then he noticed something else. The fabric was thick. Thick fabric caught wind. Wind was already unstable. Santa said slowly, "What does this do to flight handling?" Ino hesitated. "It increases drag." Santa waited. Ino continued. "We adjusted the runner polish and the balance. We also reduced weight by removing non-essential decorative items." Santa looked around at the sleigh. Decorative items included about 1,000 charming details that made children believe in magic. Mrs. Claus leaned in, voice calm but firm. Non-essential. An elf raised a hand. We removed the extra sparkle trim. Santa blinked. The sparkle trim. Another elf added also some of the jingle clusters. From somewhere near the harness rack, Comet let out a sound of outrage. Ano spoke quickly. "We will restore sound elements elsewhere. We have alternatives." Santa stared at the cozy shield. He could picture the sleigh moving through rain with toys protected. He could also picture the sleigh fighting the wind like a stubborn animal. He felt the soft tension rise again. Note fear exactly. Pressure. The kind of pressure that came from knowing the world expected perfection and did not care about the weather. Santa said, "We test it." Ano nodded. "We prepared a test corridor over the yard." Outside, the yard had been marked with tall poles and soft lanterns, creating a route for short flight tests. The air was damp. Snowflakes tried to fall but melted halfway down, giving up and turning into drizzle. The reindeer were brought out, harnessed and ready. Their expressions ranged from professional to deeply offended by moisture. Blitzen sniffed the air. "I hate this," Donna added. "The ground smells like wet disappointment." Rudolph looked at Santa. "Is this a test?" Santa nodded, short, controlled. "If it feels wrong, we stop." Rudolph glanced at the cozy shield. "It looks like a blanket wearing a helmet." Santa almost laughed. "That is accurate." They took off gently, lifting above the yard. The cozy shield settled around them, draping smoothly. The sleigh felt different immediately, heavier in the air, slower to respond. Not unmanageable, but noticeable. Santa held the reins lightly, listening to the movement. The reindeer flew with steady rhythm, but their ears twitched, adjusting to the altered sound. The bells were quieter. The canopy muffled the familiar jingling, replacing it with a soft rust. They followed the corridor, making a wide loop. Wind tugged at the canopy edges. The sleigh resisted, like it was thinking about being difficult. Ino's voice came through a small speaking charm the elves had installed, crisp and calm. "How does it feel?" Santa answered honestly. "Like flying a polite couch." Rudolph snorted softly, which might have been laughter. Santa continued. "Stable enough. Slower, but the reindeer are steady." Ino responded. "We can reinforce edge ties to reduce flutter." As they turned, a stronger gust hit. The canopy caught it, lifting slightly. The sleigh tilted, not sharply, but enough to make Santa tighten his grip. Rudolph adjusted without panic, shifting position and pulling the team into smoother alignment. The sleigh straightened, but the moment lingered like a warning. Santa said, "We stop. We adjust." They landed cleanly. Elves rushed in, checking ties and seams. Reindeer shook off moisture with exaggerated violence that remained non-violent in results, mostly just spraying cold droplets everywhere. Santa climbed down and immediately found Mrs. Claus waiting with a towel. She dabbed his beard with the care of someone cleaning up a child who had insisted on playing in mud. "You look less sparkly today," she said. Santa nodded. "The weather is washing me." Mrs. Claus tilted her head. "Are you disappointed?" Santa looked at the cozy shield, at the elves already revising, at the reindeer standing proud and damp. He thought about the old Christmas Eves, when snow fell clean and the sky behaved like it respected tradition. He said, "I am not disappointed. I am annoyed." Mrs. Claus smiled. "That is honest." Ano approached, clipboard ready. "We can reduce drag by reshaping the canopy. We can also split it into sections that flex with wind." Santa looked at Ano and felt grateful again, which was inconvenient because gratitude did not solve the problem, but it did make it bearable. "Do it," Santa said, "and we will test again." The day became a cycle of adjustment and testing. Elves stitched and reinforced and trimmed. They added flexible seams. They redistributed padding. They created new tie points that held the canopy closer to the sleigh so the wind could not grab it as easily. By the second test, the sleigh handled better. By the third, it almost felt normal, except quieter, like the night had been wrapped in cloth. Rudolph turned his head slightly mid-flight and called back, "It is less bad." Santa replied, "I will take less bad." When they landed after the final test, Ino looked satisfied in the rare way that suggested a system had been improved successfully. Then the backup plan backfired. Not in the sky, but in the workshop. The cozy shield had been designed with gentle heat. In the open air it was fine. Inside the building, where elves were working and warmth was already present, the canopy created a pocket of warm, damp air that condensed along the ceiling. Tiny droplets formed, then fell. At first it was just annoying. Then it became comedic. A small rain began inside the workshop, directly over the packaging station. Elves looked up as droplets landed on ribbons. An elf blinked as a drop hit their forehead. Another elf caught a falling droplet on their fingertip and stared at it as if the building had betrayed them. Santa walked in det as a row of gift boxes began to glisten. Ino appeared beside him, eyes wide for the first time in recorded history. "We have an indoor precipitation event." Santa stared upward. "How?" Ino pointed. "The canopy heat. The humidity. The workshop ceiling is not a cloud, but today it is trying to be." Santa took a slow breath. He felt the boredom flicker into something sharper, a tired humor that saved him from snapping. Mrs. Claus arrived behind them. She looked up at the gentle indoor rain and said, "Well, at least the weather is committed." An elf hurried over, panicked but polite. "The boughs are getting damp. The boughs will not hold shape. The boughs are emotionally compromised." Santa closed his eyes for a brief moment, then he opened them and spoke calmly, because calm was his brand and also his survival strategy. "We moved the canopy drying area outside," Santa said. "We increase ventilation. We protect the packaging station. And someone, please, bring towels." Elves moved instantly. Towels appeared from nowhere, which was one of the true miracles of the North Pole. Fans were turned on. Doors were opened briefly, letting in cold air that made everyone shiver, but also reduced the indoor rain. Santa watched the operation recover. It was impressive. It was also exhausting, because the world had become more complicated, and every complication demanded attention. When the indoor rain stopped, Santa stepped into a quiet hallway and leaned against the wall. The sounds of the workshop faded into a distant hum. Mrs. Claus found him there. She did not speak immediately. She just stood beside him, shoulder close, sharing silence like a warm blanket. After a moment, Santa said softly, "I am still bored." Mrs. Claus nodded. "Yes." Santa stared at the floor, where a few melted droplets still darkened the wood. "I should not be bored. I should be grateful. I should be inspired. Children write to me like I am the sun." Mrs. Claus' voice was gentle. "You are allowed to be a person, even if you are also Santa." Santa let out a slow breath. The boredom feels like guilt wearing a disguise. Mrs. Claus placed a hand on his arm. Then treat it like any other feeling. Acknowledge it. Do not let it drive the sleigh. Santa looked at her, eyes tired. And what do I do with it? Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. You rest, you laugh when you can, you let the elves help, you listen to the reindeer, and you keep your small promise to yourself. The beach, Santa said. Mrs. Claus nodded. The beach. Santa closed his eyes and pictured it again. Warm sand, quiet water, a beer cold enough to feel like relief. No letters, no harness straps, no indoor rain. He opened his eyes. Christmas Eve still approached. The weather still had opinions, the operation still demanded him. But he felt steadier. He pushed off the wall and stood upright. All right, he said. Back to it. Mrs. Claus smiled. Back to it. They returned to the workshop where elves were already joking about the day the building tried to become a cloud. Someone had drawn a tiny umbrella on a whiteboard. It was not an official sign. It would be erased quickly. But for a moment the North Pole laughed at the weather instead of fearing it. Santa sat at his desk later that evening, cocoa warm, letters waiting. He read a wish for a toy train. He read a wish for a warm hat. He read a wish for peace in a home that felt too loud. He set the hard wish in the special pile and felt the familiar ache of responsibility. Then he looked at his notebook where, among harness notes and canopy adjustments, he had written one simple thing. Beach. Santa smiled faintly, the kind of smile that did not perform for anyone. The weather could have opinions, the schedule could tighten, the world could demand magic in impossible conditions. Santa would still deliver, and afterward he would rest, because he was allowed. Chapter 5. A very brief historical detour for credibility. Santa did not usually read history for comfort. He read weather reports for comfort. He read inventory lists for comfort. He read elf memes for comfort, which was a sentence that would have sounded silly to him a few centuries ago. But history, real history, was different. History had a way of looking back at you with calm eyes and saying you are not special, you are just next. Still, the morning after the indoor rain event, Santa found a thin book on his desk. It was not one of the wish letters. It was not a report. It was not a new process packet with version numbers that made his beard itch. It was a book with a plain cover and a title written in careful, respectful letters. Nicholas of Myra. Santa stared at it for a long moment, then looked toward the doorway. Mrs. Claus walked in as if she had been waiting for that exact moment. She carried a tray with tea and a single cookie, which suggested she had decided he needed focus rather than comfort. You put this here, Santa said. Mrs. Claus nodded. I did. Santa touched the cover. Why? Mrs. Claus sat across from him, calm as ever. Because you are bored, she said. And when you are bored, you start talking about beaches like they are emergency exits. I thought you might benefit from remembering where all this started. Santa frowned gently. I know where it started. Mrs. Claus raised an eyebrow. You know the myth. I mean the man. Santa opened the book with the careful caution of someone entering a room that might contain judgment. The pages were thin and smelled faintly of dust and ink. The writing was simple and cleared. It described a bishop in a coastal city, in a place that once belonged to the Roman world. It described generosity offered quietly, gifts given without drama, and kindness that did not require applause. Santa read for several minutes without speaking. The North Pole around him continued its steady hum. Elves moved outside his office, tools clicking, belts rolling, distant bells chiming in balanced formation. The wind pushed at the walls like it was still trying to join the meeting, but the book pulled Santa's attention away from the cold. Nicholas of Myra lived in what is now southern Turkey near the Mediterranean Sea. Myra was a real place, and the sea there was a real sea, not the frozen, silent ocean that sometimes looked at the North Pole from far away like it was evaluating it. Santa read about the stories that gathered around Nicholas, how people remembered him for giving. Some stories were likely shaped by time, polished by repetition, but the core was steady. Give, help, do it quietly, do not make it about yourself. Santa felt a strange tightness in his chest. That last part always landed hard. Mrs. Claus watched him read with the patience of someone who knew he would pretend he was fine, then slowly become honest anyway. After a while, Santa set the book down. He stared at the desk, at the letters, at the calendar, at his notebook where Beach still sat among canopy and snack notes like a rebellious dream. He said quietly, "He seems calm." Mrs. Claus nodded. He was. In the stories that matter, he was calm. Santa rubbed his beard. "I am calm." Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. "You are a storm wearing a calm hat." Santa did not argue because it was accurate, and accuracy was rude. He picked up the book again and turned a page. There was a passage about Myra, about a coastal city and the kind of warmth that came from sun rather than heat vents. Santa paused on the word Mediterranean and felt the beach in his mind shift from fantasy to something more pointed. Not warmth, a place that matched the origin. Santa read on. The book mentioned that Nicholas became widely honoured after his death, and that his relics were moved centuries later from Myra to Bari in Italy. Bari was another real place, a port city on the Adriatic Sea, where a basilica was built in his honour. Santa stared at the name Bari. The word tasted like salt air. Mrs. Claus spoke softly. "You can go there." Santa blinked. "What?" Mrs. Claus gestured to the book. "Not now, not in the middle of December, but the world has places connected to your story. Places that are not snow, places that are not letters, places where you can stand and remember without being needed every minute." Santa looked at her. "Are you suggesting a pilgrimage?" Mrs. Claus shrugged. "Call it what you want. You like plans. Make K that includes rest. Make it respectable if that helps you accept it." Santa stared at the book again. A pilgrimage sounded serious. A beach sounded selfish. But a pilgrimage to a coastal city that honoured the person behind his own legend sounded like a kind of rest that did not trigger his guilt. He read more, and the book seemed to watch him back. It did not accuse, it did not demand, it simply reminded. You are part of a long line of people trying to do good. You are allowed to be tired. Santa closed the book gently. He looked at Mrs. Claus. "You are doing this on purpose." Mrs. Claus sipped her tea. "I do many things on purpose." Santa leaned back in his chair. He tried to picture Myra. He tried to picture Bari. He tried to picture himself walking through sunlight in a place where the air did not burn his lungs. Then he pictured the calendar. Christmas Eve still sat there, impatient and smug. Santa sighed once, quiet. "I cannot think about travel now." Mrs. Claus nodded. "True, but you can think about meaning. Meaning can help boredom behave." Santa considered that. The boredom was not a lack of gratitude. It was a signal, like a warning light. It was saying you have been running too long without stopping. It was saying you have become a machine in your own life. He looked down at his notebook and wrote 2 new words under beach: Myra, Bari. He did not know when, he did not know how, but writing them down made the world feel larger again. A knock came at the door. Eno entered with a folder. Santa felt his shoulders tighten, then he deliberately relaxed them. Yes. Eno placed the folder on the desk. Updated canopy performance, improved tie system, reduced drag. Also, wish sorting progress is ahead of yesterday by a measurable margin. Santa nodded. Thank you. Eno hesitated, then glanced at the book. Is that a history book? Santa touched the cover. Yes. Eno looked surprised and slightly delighted, as if Santa had announced he was taking up knitting. We can build a reading schedule. Santa held up a hand. Do not. Eno nodded quickly. Understood. No schedule. Eno left. Santa turned to Mrs. Claus. If the elves schedule my hobbies, I will move to the beach permanently. Mrs. Claus smiled. That is the spirit. Threaten retirement. It keeps everyone motivated. Santa laughed softly, then stopped, then laughed again because he was tired of being serious. He opened a letter and read a wish for a small stuffed animal. He read a wish for a book. He read a wish for someone to come back home safe. He set that one in the special pile. He looked at the book again. Nicholas of Myra, the man behind the myth, the calm behind the chaos. Santa did not feel less responsible. He felt more human. That was enough for one morning. Chapter 6. The tropical fantasy becomes an operational proposal. Santa did not announce his beach plan in a dramatic speech. He did not stand on a table and declare that he deserved sun. He did not carve it into the ice outside the workshop like a poet with questionable judgment. He did something much more dangerous. He made it a proposal. He walked into the main planning room with a stack of papers, a calm expression, and the quiet determination of a man who had been cold for too long. Aino was already there, of course. Aino always seemed to arrive before time itself. Several senior elves sat around the table, each with notebooks and pens lined up neatly, like the pens were also employees. Mrs. Claus sat in a chair either corner, tea in hand, watching with the calm of someone who enjoyed seeing what happened when Santa tried to be clever. Santa placed his papers on the table. Aino tilted their head. "Santa, what is this?" Santa cleared his throat. "It is a proposal." An elf named Timo leaned forward. "For production," Santa said carefully. "For time." Aino's eyes narrowed slightly in professional interest. "Continue." Santa pointed to the first page. "We have 10 days left until Christmas Eve." No one corrected him about the exact count because everyone knew the calendar was a sensitive creature. Santa continued. "Weather is unstable. The canopy is improving. The reindeer have standards. The letters are endless. We need a plan that reduces risk and reduces strain." Aino nodded. "Reasonable." Santa took a breath. "Therefore, I propose we run Christmas Eve as a streamlined operation, a speed run but with dignity." The room went still. Timo blinked. "A speed run?" Santa nodded. "Yes. We optimize routes. We reduce unnecessary flourishes. We pre-stage key items by region. We use your new sorting system to reduce last-minute decisions. We support the reindeer with scheduled rests, and we finish as efficiently as possible." Aino stared at him. "You want to reduce flourishes?" Santa held the gaze. "For when night, we still deliver joy. We just do it with fewer complicated rituals that slow her down." An elf named Lena raised a hand. "What rituals?" Santa said. "For example, the optional double loop above certain cities." Lena frowned. "The double loop is tradition." Santa nodded. "It is, but it also burns time, increases exposure to unstable wind, and makes Blitzen complain." From the hallway outside, Blitzen seemed to sense his name and snorted loud enough to be heard through the wall. Mrs. Claus sipped tea, amused. Aino flipped to the next page of Santa proposal. "There are charts." Santa hesitated. "Yes." Aino looked impressed and concerned. "You made charts." Santa said I was desperate. Aino scanned the charts: route compression, time blocks, buffer zones, weather contingencies, reindeer rest windows. Aino looked up. "You have included reindeer rest windows?" Santa nodded. I listened. Timo leaned closer. "This plan reduces total flight time by how much?" Santa avoided numbers because numbers had a way of making the room feel like a factory. He said, "By enough to matter." Aino nodded slowly. "The plan is not unreasonable." Santa felt hope rise, thin and cautious. Aino continued, "But why?" Santa opened his mouth, then closed it. This was the part where honesty could make him sound selfish. The room was full of elves who worked all year for this one season. Santa did not want to sound like he was abandoning them. Mrs. Claus set down her teacup softly. "He wants rest," she said, voice calm. "He wants Wednesday where his beard is not full of snow." The room stayed quiet. Then Lena nodded, slowly. "That seems fair," Timo added. "We also want rest." Aino looked back at Santa. "You want a beach." Santa stared at Aino. "I did not say beach." Mrs. Claus smiled. "You did not have to." Aino returned to the papers. If we implement this, we will need strict coordination. Santa nodded. Yes. Aino looked at the other elves. We will need refined production, pacing and packaging sequencing. Elves began to talk, quietly at first, then with rising energy. They loved coordination, they loved sequencing, they loved the idea of turning chaos into something you could explain on a whiteboard. Lena said, we can pre-bundle region crates. Timo said, we can stage by time zones and weather probability. Another elf said, we can reduce custom wrapping in favor of standardized ties. A different elf whispered, we must be careful with bows. Bows are emotionally complicated. Santa listened, letting them build the machine around his idea. It was comforting and slightly terrifying, like watching a bridge assemble itself under your feet while you walked. Aino tapped the table gently. We will also need reindeer alignment. Santa nodded. I will speak to them. Mrs. Claus lifted her teacup in a small salute, as if toasting the concept of Santa doing his own meetings. Later that afternoon, Santa went to the reindeer barn with his notebook and his most respectful posture. Rudolph looked up as Santa entered. You are here with purpose. Santa nodded. I have a proposal. Donna sighed loudly. Here it comes. Santa held up a hand. It is not bad. Blitzen squinted. That is what people say right before it is bad. Santa took a breath. I want Christmas Eve to be shorter. The barn went quiet in a different way. This was not the quiet of polite listening. This was the quiet of reindeer doing math in their heads and deciding whether they liked the result. Rudolph tilted his head. Shorter. Santa nodded. More efficient. Fewer unnecessary loops, better staging, more rest windows for you, less exposure to unstable weather. We do the job well and we do not drag it out. Comet stepped forward. That sounds good. Cupid added, efficient joy. Prancer looked suspicious. What do we give up? Santa said honestly, some flourishes, some dramatic hovering, less time showing off. Blitzen snorted. We do not show off. Donna said, we absolutely show off. Rudolph kept watching Santa. And what do you do when we finish? Santa hesitated. This was the moment where his beach dream could sound like betrayal. He decided to be careful, not secretive. I rest, Santa said. I rest properly, then I come back better. Rudolph nodded slowly. And the beach. Santa sighed, quiet. Yes, a beach. Blitzen rolled his eyes. Of course. Donna said, what kind of beach? Santa blinked. I do not know. One with warmth. Vixen said, warmth is acceptable. Prancer said, are there carrots? Santa stared. On the beach. Prancer nodded. Just asking. Santa said, we will focus on the operational details first. Rudolph stepped closer. If you want this plan, you must keep your promises again. Rest windows are real. Snacks are real. Warm water is real. You do not push us through rain to save your schedule. Santa nodded. Agreed. Rudolph lowered his head slightly, which was the reindeer version of shaking hands. Then we will cooperate. Santa felt relief move through him like warmth. He did not deserve but desperately needed. The next days became a strange mix of holiday magic and corporate efficiency. Elves built staging areas like small airports. Crates were stacked in neat patterns. Checklists multiplied, then were organized into better checklists. Aino created a master schedule that made Santa feel both safer and slightly trapped. Mrs. Claus kept appearing with tea and calm reminders that sleep was not optional. Santa tried to argue once and lost immediately. Reindeer training sessions changed too. Instead of long dramatic flights in miserable weather, they practiced shorter runs with sharper turns and calmer pacing. They trained on canopy handling. They tested new tie systems. They rehearsed landing patterns. You seem thoughtful. Rudolph blinked slowly. I am trying to imagine the beach. Santa smiled faintly. How is it going? Rudolph said, I cannot picture sand. I only know snow. Santa nodded. That is fair. Rudolph continued, I can picture sunlight though. I can picture warmth on my face. I can picture standing still and not listening for wind shifts. Santa felt a small ache. Yes. Rudolph looked at him. And I can picture you not reading letters for one day. Santa laughed softly. That might be the hardest part. Rudolph said, "If you can do that, the rest is simple." Santa stared out at the yard. The workshop lights glowed warm against the dark, elves moved in steady rhythm. The world outside wanted magic, the weather wanted to argue. Christmas Eve kept approaching with quiet confidence. Santa placed a hand on the barn door frame. "Then we do it," he said. "We do the plan. We do it well. Then I rest." Rudolph nodded once. Good. Santa returned to his office later that night and opened his notebook. Under Myra and Bari he wrote one more line. After Christmas. He did not write beach this time. He did not need to. The plan was moving. The operation was tightening. The boredom was still there, but it had less power now, because it had been acknowledged, respected, and turned into something practical. Santa looked at the calendar again. Christmas Eve waited, as it always did. This year Santa planned to meet it with calm efficiency, and afterward he planned to meet the sea. Chapter 7. The Great Rehearsal and the Small Meltdown. The first thing Santa noticed was the silence. Not the full silence of deep snow, but the kind of silence you get when a room full of extremely competent people is trying very hard not to panic. The workshop was still running, conveyors still rolling, tools still clicking, cocoa still steaming, but the sound had changed. It had become careful. It had become measured. It had become the sound of an entire operation holding its breath. Santa stood at the edge of the staging area and looked at the sleigh. The sleigh looked good. It looked ready. It looked like it had been through a dozen meetings and had survived all of them, which was true. The cozy shield canopy hung in its new refined form. It was not as bulky now. It flexed with the air. It sat tighter against the sleigh. It had reinforced ties and neat seams. It still made the sleigh look like it was wearing an elegant winter coat, but now it was an elegant coat that did not try to fly away. Aino stood beside the sleigh with a clipboard, naturally. Aino had become the kind of presence that made Santa feel both safer and mildly supervised. Aino was not unkind. Aino was simply built from planning. Santa cleared his throat. "How many checklists are we using today?" Aino answered without emotion. 6. Santa nodded. "That is normal now." Aino corrected gently. "That is reduced." Santa stared at Aino. "Reduced." Aino nodded. "We removed 2 redundant lists." Santa felt an unexpected gratitude. "Thank you." Aino tilted the clipboard. "We are beginning the full rehearsal." Santa glanced upward. "Full rehearsal." Aino nodded. "Complete sequence. Packing, staging, launch, flight path simulation, landing, reload procedure, emergency handling, and return." Santa let out a slow breath. "That is a lot." Aino nodded again. "That is why we rehearse." Mrs. Claus appeared on Santa's other side, holding a mug of tea and wearing the calm expression of someone who knew the rehearsal would either build confidence or cause a dramatic spiral. Mrs. Claus did not try to stop dramatic spirals. She simply made sure they did not swallow the building. She took a sip. "You look tense." Santa did not deny it. "I am thinking about the part where the weather laughs at her." Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. "The weather always laughs. You just have to laugh back." Santa considered that. He was not sure he had the energy for laughing contests with clouds. The elves moved with purposeful speed. They rolled crates into position. They checked seals. They confirmed packing lists. They adjusted straps. They inspected tie points. They spoke in short phrases like professional pilots preparing a complicated flight. Santa walked along the line of crates and watched the new staging system in action. It was impressive. Crates were grouped by region. They were labeled with symbols rather than words, because elves had decided that words were slow, and also because Santa had asked for fewer things that could be misread in low light. One crate had a small carved star on it, another had a carved wave, another had a tiny carved mountain. Santa recognized the system now. It was elegant. It was also slightly mocking, because it reminded him that the elves could build an entire language of logistics while he still struggled with his own boredom. Aino approached with a sheet of paper. "This is the compressed route plan." Santa took it and scanned. It was clean, structured, and terrifying. It turned the world into a series of calm steps. It turned joy into timing. It turned Christmas into a schedule. Santa looked up. I hate that I like this. Ino allowed a faint smile. We know. Rudolph and the team arrived, hooves soft on packed snow, harnesses fitted and comfortable. The reindeer looked different lately. Not happier exactly, because reindeer were too proud to show simple happiness, but steadier, less irritated, more ready. Blitzen looked at the sleigh canopy and snorted. It looks better. Donna nodded once. It looks less like a blanket fortress. Comet stepped forward and listened to the bells. The bells rang evenly, with a balanced shimmer. Comet closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing music. Then he nodded, satisfied. Cupid stared at the crates. Are those snacks? An elf answered quickly. Some crates are for snacks. There is a separate snack crate. Cupid looked relieved. Good. Santa stepped to the front of the sleigh, near Rudolph. We do the sequence. If anything feels wrong, we stop and fix it. No heroics. Rudolph nodded. No heroics. Good. Dasher added, unless the heroics are snacks. Vixen chewed something quietly and said, snacks are not heroics, snacks are stability. Santa almost laughed. He held it back. He was trying to be a professional leader. It was difficult when the people around you were serious about carrots. Ino raised a hand. Rehearsal begins. A bell chimed, not the sleigh bells, a separate small bell used for operational announcements. Elves moved into positions. Santa climbed into the sleigh and settled in. He held the reins and felt their familiar weight. He took a breath. The rehearsal launch was scheduled, which was strange because real launches were usually a feeling rather than a times. But today, everything was a time. In a voice calm and clear called out the steps. Confirm canopy ties. Elves responded in chorus. Confirmed. Confirm runner polish. Confirmed. Confirm crate seals. Confirmed. Confirm snack crate. A separate elf held up a crate like it was sacred. Confirmed. Rudolph shifted his stance. Santa felt the reindeer team settle into readiness. Ano called, launch. The reindeer lifted and the sleigh rose. Even rehearsals felt like miracles. Even when you knew it would happen, even when you had done it countless times, the moment the ground dropped away, the air caught the sleigh and the world became a quiet map below, Santa felt his chest loosen. They flew above the yard and followed the simulation corridor, then out beyond it into open air. The sky was a pale grey, not hostile yet, but full of potential mood swings. The wind was mild. The canopy sat tight and steady. Ino voice came through the speaking charm. Segment tie, stable, Santa answered. Stable. Rudolph kept the team aligned. The reindeer flew with smooth rhythm. Harnesses held, bells rang. The canopy did not flap, the sleigh responded well to turns. Santa glanced down at the world below, a quilt of snow and dark forest. This was where he felt most himself, up here. Not at the desk, not under the weight of letters. Here, where the air was clear and the work was direct. The speaking charm crackled. Segment 2, crate access simulation. Santa reached back, unlatched a crate and performed the motion sequence the elves had trained him on. It was efficient. It was almost too efficient. The crate opened smoothly. The contents were staged neatly. Santa grabbed a sample package and resealed the crate. Ino voice. Time record improved. Santa felt a flicker of pride, immediately followed by annoyance at himself for taking pride in being faster at opening boxes. They continued the rehearsal pattern, simulating deliveries and reloading procedures. Then, halfway through segment 3, the small meltdown arrived. It began with a sound, a soft pop. Santa felt it more than heard it, a subtle release of tension in the sleigh frame, like a strap snapping somewhere behind him. The canopy shifted slightly. Not much, just enough for the wind to notice. Rudolph's ears flicked back. Santa held the reins steady. He did not want to overreact. Overreaction was how you turned small issues into big ones. Ano's voice came through, sharper now. We have canopy flutter. Confirm tie status. Santa reached back and checked. One tie had loosened, a clip that should have held but had slipped under vibration. Santa called. Tie 3 is loose. Aino responded instantly. Abort segment, return pattern. Rudolph adjusted course. The sleigh turned gently toward home. It should have been fine. It was fine. But something about the loosened tie, the shifting canopy, and the memory of slush testing made Santa mind do what tired minds do. It started imagining everything that could go wrong. He pictured the canopy lifting mid-Christmas Eve over a dense neighborhood. He pictured crates getting damp. He pictured letters and cookies and all the small traditions getting soaked. He pictured the reindeer tired and irritated and fighting wind while he tried to keep calm. And then, because his mind was feeling dramatic, it pictured him at the beach, sitting under palm leaves holding a beer while everyone else dealt with the chaos. The thought was so selfish it made him flinch. His grip tightened on the reins. Rudolph felt it. Rudolph turned his head slightly, eyes steady, and looked at Santa. It was not accusing, it was not angry. It was a simple question without words. Are you here? Santa swallowed. Yes, he told himself. Yes, he was here. He forced his hands to loosen. He breathed out slowly. He steadied his voice and said into the charm, "We are returning." Calm handling. Aino's voice softened slightly. Understood. Good. They landed smoothly in the yard. Elves rushed in, checking ties and clips. Aino moved like a quiet storm, clipboard held like a shield, eyes scanning for root causes. Santa climbed down and stood by the sleigh, watching the elves work. Mrs. Claus approached him with a spare scarf. She looked at his face and did not ask how it went. She already knew. She said softly, "You are spiraling." Santa blinked. "I am not spiraling." Mrs. Claus nodded. "That is what spiraling people say." Santa looked toward the workshop, where the lights glowed warm. "I just do not want this to fail." Mrs. Claus' voice was steady. "It will not fail because you will not let it fail, but you also cannot hold it by squeezing it to death." Santa stared at the sleigh. The elves tightened the tie, replaced the clip, and added a backup loop. It was small, quick, and efficient. Santa said, "I keep thinking about the beach." Mrs. Claus nodded. "Good. Think about it, but do not use it as a way to leave early in your head." Santa rubbed his beard. "I hate how wise you are." Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. "You married it." Aino approached with the clipboard. Failure point identified. Clip material was slightly brittle in cold vibration. "We will replace all clips with improved alloy. We will also add redundant ties in critical points." Santa nodded. "Do it." Aino continued. "The rehearsal will resume after adjustment." Santa felt the pressure in his chest. Resume. He wanted to sit. He wanted to drink cocoa. He wanted to read history and pretend the operation would run itself. Instead, he nodded again. Resume. The elves worked fast. The reindeer waited patiently. Even Blitzen held back complaints, which was a sign of seriousness. When the canopy was secured again, Aino called the next launch. Santa climbed into the sleigh, took the reins, and breathed. Rudolph spoke quietly, just for Santa. "You got tight." Santa nodded. "I did." Rudolph said, "When you get tight, we get tight. We fly better when you trust the work." Santa looked at Rudolph. "I do trust you." Rudolph blinked. "Trust the whole thing, not just us." Santa exhaled. "You sound like Mrs. Claus." Rudolph looked mildly offended. "I do not make tea." Santa gave a soft laugh, then stopped, then let himself laugh again because it helped. "All right," he said. "I trust the whole thing." They launched again. This time Santa kept his hands lighter. He listened to the air. He let the sleigh move. He let the canopy hold. He let the reindeer do what they did best. The rehearsal continued. They simulated more segments. They practiced emergency handling. They practiced quick return patterns. They practiced crate access in cold wind and mild turbulence. By the end, Santa felt exhausted in a cleaner way. Not the exhaustion of drowning in letters, the exhaustion of doing the work with full attention. They landed for the final time as the sky darkened. Elves cheered quietly, not loud, because loud cheering felt like tempting fate. Aino smiled, a rare full smile, and closed the clipboard. "Rehearsal complete," Aino said. "Performance within target. Issues identified and resolved. Reindeer feedback. Rudolph stepped forward. Better. Donna nodded. Better. Blitzen said, still cold. Santa smiled. Yes, still cold. Cupid asked, snacks. An elf handed over a carrot. Snack. Cupid looked satisfied. The reindeer were led back to the barn, blankets waiting. Elves returned to their station. The workshop resumed its steady hum. Santa stood alone for a moment beside the sleigh, hand resting on the runner. The sleigh felt like an old companion, one that kept changing and still stayed the same. Mrs. Claus came up beside him. You did not melt down in front of everyone. That is progress. Santa sighed softly. I melted down quietly. Mrs. Claus nodded. Quiet meltdowns are better. They do not splash. Santa glanced at the sky. The clouds were still they, low and grey. He looked back at the workshop, at the light, at the people. Then he thought about the beach again, not as an escape, but as a promise. He said quietly, I will finish Christmas Eve. Then I will rest, really rest. Mrs. Claus smiled. Good. Santa turned toward his office, where letters still waited. He walked with a steadier pace because he had rehearsed the night, faced the small failure, and survived it without losing himself. Chapter 8. The world sends mixed signals. Letters were usually predictable, not in content, because human hearts were never predictable, but in rhythm. They arrived. Santa read them. The world spun on. Wishes formed patterns. Toys repeated. Hope came in familiar shapes. This week the letters felt different. Santa sat at his desk with the new sorting system working around him like a quiet machine. Elves delivered batches. Emotional complexity piles formed with careful labels. The backlog was shrinking in a way that felt both satisfying and suspicious, like the universe might punish them for competence. Santa opened a letter and frowned. The wish inside was not for a toy, it was for weather. Dear Santa, it said in careful handwriting, can you please ask the sky to stop raining? My mittens are sad. Santa stared at the page. He did not know whether to laugh or feel judged by a child with better emotional honesty than most adults. He set the letter aside gently and opened another. Dear Santa, I would like a flashlight, and also please tell the reindeer to be careful because I saw a video of a plane in strong wind and it looked scary. Santa blinked. Children were watching weather videos now. Of course they were. Another letter asked for a book. Another asked for warm socks. Another asked for a family to stop being loud. Another asked for someone to come home safe. Another asked for Santa to please take a day off. Santa paused on that last one, his fingers still on the page. He looked out the window. Snow drifted across the yard in thin waves, but underneath, the ground looked darker, wet in places. The sky was a dull grey. The wind kept changing its mind. The world was sending mixed signals. Children wanted magic, but they were also watching the world with sharper eyes. They knew about storms and delays and weird weather. They were asking Santa to be careful, not just generous. Santa felt something shift. Not fear, not pride. Respect. The world was not the same stage it used to be. The old script did not fit as neatly. If Santa wanted to keep delivering, he had to keep adapting, not just for himself, but because the people he served were adapting too. A knock came. Aeon stepped in with a folder. Progress update, Aeon said. Backlog reduced. We are ahead of schedule by a meaningful margin. Santa looked up. Meaningful margin? Aeon nodded. We are not using numerals, but yes. Santa smiled faintly. Good. Aeon set the folder down. We also have updated weather monitoring. Santa sighed softly, then stopped, then sighed again because he was tired of performing calm. Tell me. Aino opened the folder. Forecast remains unstable. We have identified likely rain bands and suggested route buffers. We have recommended alternate altitude layers. Santa nodded. Thank you. Aino hesitated. There is also a public relations matter. Santa blinked. Public relations. Aino nodded. Rovaniemi has increased visitor traffic. There are more cameras and more drones. Santa rubbed his forehead. Drones. Ano continued. We are not worried about secrecy as much as safety. Drones can interfere. Santa leaned back. The world used to leave the sky alone on Christmas. Ano nodded. The world is curious now. Santa thought of the letter about the plane in strong wind. Children watched videos. Adults flew drones. Everyone wanted a piece of the magic, even if they did not realize they were reaching into the air where the reindeer had to work. Santa said, we adjust. We avoid high-traffic air near certain locations. We use alternate lanes. Ino nodded. Already planned. Santa paused. And tell the reindeer. Ino nodded. I will. When Ino left, Santa read another letter. This one was from a child in Norway. The handwriting was small and neat. It asked for a simple thing, a set of coloured pencils, and then it asked a bigger thing. Dear Santa, please rest. I think you work too much. Also, if you come to Oslo, I hope you get cocoa and not cold wind. Santa smiled, surprised at the specific kindness of it. Oslo. A real place, with real cold wind, and real people who still made room in their minds for a man in a sleigh. Santa set the letter down and stared at the word Oslo. He had flown over Norway more times than he could count. He knew the lines of coast and mountain. He knew the quiet lights scattered across snow. He knew the way the sea looked black in winter, moving like it was thinking. He also knew that the idea of a beach felt far away from that winter sea. But the sea was still the sea. It still carried the promise of something beyond snow. That afternoon, Santa did something he rarely did. He left his desk without a crisis forcing him. He followed the break schedule. He walked through the workshop, nodding at elves, letting the sound of their work wash over him. He stepped outside into the cold air, pulled his coat tighter, and walked slowly across the yard to a small ridge that gave a view of the horizon. From there, the North Pole looked almost peaceful. The workshop lights glowed warm, the reindeer barn sat steady, snow moved like slow smoke. The sky hung low and grey, but there was a break in it near the horizon, a thin lighter band like someone had drawn a line of hope with a dull pencil. Santa stood there and let his mind drift. Not to the beach yet, to the route. He pictured the globe, the time zones, the compressed plan. He pictured the reindeer flying hard but with rests. He pictured the canopy holding against rain. He pictured crate access smooth and fast. He pictured the night running like a well-tuned machine. He also pictured the places, real places, that always anchored him. He pictured Lapland, the forests and lakes. He pictured Rovaniemi, the city that wore his name like a scarf. He pictured the river, the streets, the lights, the people who visited for the feeling of Christmas even when Christmas was a complicated season. He pictured Norway, the long coast, the mountains, the cities pressed against dark water. He pictured Oslo, cold but alive, full of people moving through winter with stubborn warmth. He pictured rooftops dusted with snow and windows glowing, and then he pictured the Mediterranean again, Myra, Bari, sunlight, salt air. He felt the mixed signals of the world as a kind of map inside him. North Pole cold and duty, northern cities and winter sea, southern coasts and warmth, tradition and change, magic and logistics. He breathed out slowly. When he went back inside, Mrs. Claus was waiting near his office door as if she had known he would return at that exact moment. She looked at his face. You took a break. Santa nodded. I did. Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. Incredible. Santa gave a tired laugh. Do not make it a celebration. I will get arrogant. Mrs. Claus stepped aside to let him into the office. How are the letters? Santa sat down. Strange. Mrs. Claus raised an eyebrow. Strange how? Santa picked up the letter about mittens and rain. Children are requesting weather adjustments. Mrs. Claus read it and smiled. They have good taste. Santa opened another letter and held it up. They are also asking about reindeer safety and drones. Mrs. Claus frowned. Drones are annoying. Santa nodded. Yes. Mrs. Claus sat across from him. The world knows more now. They worry more. They ask more. Santa stared at the piles. And they still want the same things too. Warm socks, books, toys, family peace. Mrs. Claus nodded. People change and people stay the same. Santa looked at his notebook where Beach and Myra and Bari sat like quiet anchors. He said softly, "I used to feel like a story people visited. Now I feel like a job people monitor." Mrs. Claus considered that. Then she said, "You are still a story, but the world is older now. Stories have to be sturdier." Santa sat with that for a moment, then he did something that surprised him. He reached for the special pile, the emotional complexity letters, and he began writing replies. Not to all of them, because that was impossible, and he was not trying to invent more work, but to a few, the ones that asked for rest, for safety, for calm. He wrote in simple words. He wrote kindly. He wrote promises he could keep. "Dear friend," he wrote, "I will be careful. I will keep the reindeer safe. I will try to rest after Christmas. Thank you for thinking of me. Keep your mittens warm. If the sky is rude, wear 2 layers. He paused on that last sentence, then smiled. It was not perfect. It was honest. Later, the reindeer meeting happened again, but this time it was shorter because the reindeer were already invested in the plan. Rudolph listened as Santa explained the drone concern and the adjusted routes. Rudolph nodded. "We will avoid busy air." Blitzen snorted. "Good. I do not want to collide with a flying camera." Donna added, "Also snacks." Santa nodded. "Snacks remain." The reindeer seemed satisfied. They were professionals. They wanted clear expectations and reliable carrots. They were not asking for miracles. They were asking for respect. That evening, Santa sat in his office with the last light fading outside, and he opened a final letter. It was from a child who had written only a few words. "Dear Santa, I hope you are okay." Santa stared at it for a long time. He thought about boredom. He thought about duty. He thought about weather and drones and canopy ties and clip alloys. He thought about Myra and Bari and the beach. He took out his pen and wrote back, "Dear friend, I am tired, but I am okay. Thank you for asking. I will do my best. After Christmas, I will sit somewhere warm and listen to the sea for a while." He read his own words and felt something in his chest unclench. Not because the problems were solved, but because he had admitted, even to a child he would never meet, that he was not a machine. He set the letter aside and looked out the window. Snow fell lightly now, almost polite. The sky was still grey but calmer. The wind softened. The workshop hummed. The world was sending mixed signals, but it was also sending something else. Concern, kindness, a reminder that even the man who delivered gifts could be held gently in return. Santa closed his notebook and stood up. He would keep reading, he would keep planning, he would keep adapting, he would keep the reindeer safe, he would deliver Christmas. And afterward he would take the day he promised himself, because the world, strangely enough, seemed to agree he deserved it. Chapter 9. The Night Before Christmas Eve. The North Pole had a special kind of quiet of the night before Christmas Eve. It was not the quiet of rest. It was the quiet of people who had done everything they could do and still felt the edge of what they could not control. The workshop lights stayed on, but they dimmed slightly, like the building was trying to soothe itself. The conveyors moved slower. The tool sounds softened. Even the elves spoke in lower voices, as if loud words might provoke the weather. Santa walked the main floor without his coat, beard slightly damp from melted snow, hands warm from holding too many mugs of cocoa. He had followed the break schedule all week. He had eaten. He had slept in short blocks. He had stretched, which felt suspicious, but it helped. He still felt the pressure. It was a familiar pressure, shaped like tradition and deadlines, heavy and oddly comforting. It was the pressure of being needed by people he would never meet. It was the pressure of wanting to do it well, not because anyone forced him, but because he still cared. Aino stood near the final staging line, clipboard in hand. Aino did not look tired in the normal way. Aino looked tired in the way of a person whose tiredness had become a fuel source. "Final packing is within target," Aino said. "Canopy ties replaced with improved clips, redundant loops installed, Route plan locked. Snack crate secured. Santa nodded. Snack crate is always secured. Ano glanced at him. Reindeer briefing is scheduled in an hour. Santa exhaled slowly. Scheduled. Ano did not apologize. The schedule keeps her calm. Santa smiled faintly. It keeps me supervised. Ano accepted this as correct. Mrs. Claus requested you eat a meal before the briefing. Santa frowned. She told you? Ano nodded. She told everyone. Santa looked around at the elves, at the steady hands, at the quiet focus. Fine, he said. I will eat. Ino made a note as if Santa had agreed to a legally binding contract. Thank you. Santa walked to the small dining corner set up near the warmest section of the workshop. It was not a dining room. It was a practical space where elves and Santa could stop moving long enough to remember they had bodies. Mrs. Claus was there, of course, with a bowl of stew and a slice of bread that looked like it had been made by someone who believed nourishment was a form of love. She watched Santa sit down. Eat, she said. Santa picked up the spoon. You are very controlled. Mrs. Claus sipped her tea. You are very stubborn. We balance each other. Santa ate. The stew was warm and steady. It tasted like vegetables and quiet determination. It did not taste like the beach, but it tasted like survival. When he finished, Mrs. Claus slid a folded scarf across the table. For tomorrow night, she said. Weather is still unpredictable. Santa touched the scarf. Thank you. Mrs. Claus looked at him carefully. How is your mind? Santa hesitated. That question was harder than any weather forecast. He answered honestly. Busy. Mrs. Claus nodded. And the boredom. Santa took a slow breath. It is still they, but it is quieter. It feels like it is waiting to see if I keep my promise. Mrs. Claus smiled slightly. Good. Keep it. Santa stood. I have to talk to the reindeer. Mrs. Claus nodded. Be calm. Santa nodded back. I will try it. He walked to the reindeer barn under a sky that looked like it might rain, might snow, might do something new just to be interesting. The air was cold and damp. Snow squeaked under his boots in some places and squished in others. He did not like the squish. Inside the barn, the reindeer were gathered in a loose semicircle, like a committee that had decided to look casual while being very serious. Rudolph stood at the center, calm, nose glowing softly. Blitzen was nearest the door, as if ready to leave the moment anyone said something offensive. Donna stood beside him, expression neutral but watchful. Comet and Cupid were whispering to each other about something that looked suspiciously like snack strategy. Vixen chewed slowly, the sound of it oddly reassuring. Prancer stood slightly apart, posture formal, as if expecting courtroom proceedings. Santa stepped in and raised his hands slightly, palms open. Thank you for meeting, Donna snorted. We live here. Santa nodded. True, thank you for being here. Rudolph blinked slowly. We are ready for the briefing. Santa took out his notebook, mostly to show respect. He had learned that reindeer valued visible seriousness. We launch tomorrow night, Santa said. Route plan is compressed. Canopy is improved. Weather monitoring is active. We have alternate lanes to avoid busy air. We have rest windows, real ones, not imaginary ones. We have snack drops scheduled. Cupid perked up. Snack drops. Santa nodded. Snack drops. Blitzen narrowed his eyes. And rain. Santa took a slow breath. Forecast is mixed. We may encounter slush in some northern corridors. We will avoid where possible. We will adjust altitude. If conditions are unsafe, we will return and reroute. No forcing. Donna watched Santa fed. You say that now, but when you are in the air and the clock is pressing, you get intense. Santa felt his chest tighten. It was true. He looked at Donna and said calmly, That is why I am saying it now, and that is why I want you to hold me to it. The barn went very quiet. Rudolph stepped forward slightly. You are asking us to correct you. Santa nodded. Yes. If I push, you tell me no. If I get tight, you tell me to breathe. If I forget rest windows, you remind me. Blitzen snorted. We already do that. Santa smiled faintly. Then keep doing it, loudly if needed. Vixen stopped chewing long enough to speak. We do not want to strike, but we will not be treated like equipment. Santa nodded. Understood. Prancer lifted his chin. And our dignity. Santa nodded again. With dignity. Comet flicked an ear. And the bells. Santa smiled. The bells are balanced. Comet looked satisfied. Rudolph held Santa gaze. Why are you doing this differently this year? Santa could have said efficiency. He could have said weather. He could have said drones and systems and I know and checklists. Instead, he said the truth. Because I want to finish well, Santa said, and because I want to rest afterward without guilt eating me alive. A quiet sound moved through the group, not laughter, more like approval disguised as breathing. Donna said, "You should rest." Blitzen added, "You should rest far away from slush." Cupid said, "You should rest near snacks." Santa smiled. "A beach has snacks." Prancer asked, "Do beaches have carrots?" Santa stared at Prancer. "We will see." Rudolph nodded slowly. "All right, we agree. We will fly, we will follow the plan, we will keep you ons. And you will keep your promises." Santa nodded. "I will." Rudolph stepped closer. "Then say it." Santa blinked. "Say what?" Rudolph's voice was calm but firm. "Say you will stop if it is unsafe. Say you will take the rest windows. Say you will not turn your dream into a reason to rush." Santa felt his throat tighten. He had been Santa for centuries. He had spoken to crowds. He had laughed for children. He had negotiated with reindeer. He had survived storms. This was still hard. He said, "I will stop if it is unsafe. I will take the rest windows. I will not rush just to reach my rest. I will do the night well." Rudolph nodded once. "Good." The meeting could have ended there, but soft tension still lingered, like a knot that needed a gentle pull. Donna shifted his weight. "There is some more thing." Santa looked at him. "Yes," Donna said. "You have been writing replies to letters." Santa blinked. "Who told you?" Blitzen snorted. "Everyone. The elves talk." Santa nodded slowly. "Yes, I wrote a few." Donna looked at him with an expression Santa rarely saw on Donna's face. Not unimpressed, not irritated, something softer. Donna said, "That was good." Santa felt a small warmth in his chest. "Thank you." Blitzen added, "It makes the job feel less like a machine." Santa exhaled slowly. "Yes." Rudolph tilted his head. "You are remembering that you are a person." Santa nodded. "I am trying." Rudolph gave a small, almost invisible smile. "Good. Because we are not carrying a machine. We are carrying you." Santa stood in the barn for a moment, letting that land. Then he closed his notebook and put it away. "All right," he said. "Rest tonight. Eat. Drink warm water. Keep your bodies ready. Tomorrow night we fly." The reindeer murmured their agreement. Hooves shifted. Breath rose in soft clouds. Santa left the barn and walked back toward the workshop. The yard was quiet. The sky remained dull and low, but the air felt calmer. The wind had stopped pushing, as if even it needed a break. Inside the workshop, the final tasks wrapped up. Elves checked and rechecked. Aino walked the lines with calm intensity, then finally closed the clipboard and allowed the smallest sigh. Santa caught it and smiled. "Aino, you sighed." Aino looked offended. That was not a sigh. That was a controlled exhale. Santa nodded, of course. Mrs. Claus found Santa in his office later, where he sat staring at the calendar. "Tomorrow," he said softly. Mrs. Claus nodded. "Tomorrow." Santa looked at his notebook where Myra and Bari sat beside the word "be." He touched the page lightly, as if it might disappear. Mrs. Claus' voice was gentle. "You can do it." Santa nodded. "I can." Mrs. Claus stepped closer. "And after." Santa smiled faintly. "After." He stood up, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in many nights, he went to bed before his body gave up and forced him. In the dark, he pictured the sleigh and the night and the long flight. He also pictured warm sand and a cold beer, not as an escape, as a promise kept. Chapter 10. Christmas Eve and the Escape Hatch. Christmas Eve arrived like it always did, with a quiet certainty that made time feel like a hallway you could not avoid. The North Pole was dark, the sky heavy, the air cold enough to make thoughts feel crisp. Snow fell lightly, the kind of snow that did not ask question. Santa appreciated that. He had had enough question. The workshop glowed with warm light. Inside, elves moved in calm patterns, efficient and steady, voices low. The staging system stood ready. Crates were aligned. Canopy ties were double-checked. Snack crates sat in their own section like honored guests. Aino stood near the sleigh, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. All systems confirmed, Aino said. Santa stepped forward, coat thick, scarf wrapped, gloves on. He felt the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders, the role fitting him like an old garment that still carried warmth. Mrs. Claus approached and adjusted his scarf with practiced hands. "Be calm," she said. Santa nodded. "I will." Mrs. Claus handed him a small thermos. "Warm cocoa," she said. "Do not pretend you do not need it." Santa took it. "Thank you." Mrs. Claus looked into his eyes. "And remember," she said softly, "the beach comes after doing it well, not after doing it fast." Santa felt his throat tighten again, but he nodded. Yes. He climbed into the sleigh. The seat creaked slightly, as if reminding him it was real wood, not myth. He placed the thermos within reach. He took the reins. The reindeer stood ready, harnesses fitted, bells balanced, breath rising in steady clouds. Rudolph's nose glowed gently, the red light soft and calm, not flashy. It felt like guidance rather than performance. Rudolph looked back, ready. Santa took a breath, ready. Aino raised a hand. Launch sequence. Elves called out confirmations. Canopy ties confirmed. Runner polish confirmed. Crate seals confirmed. Snack crate confirmed. Santa heard the familiar rhythm of readiness and felt his chest loosen. This was not just tradition. This was preparation. This was a team. Aino voice, crisp. Launch. Rudolph surged forward, the team lifted. The sleigh rose, the yard dropped away, the workshop lights shrank into a warm cluster against the dark. The North Pole spread out below like an endless white breath. Santa felt the air catch the sleigh and carry it forward. He was in it now. The night opened around them. The first segment was smooth, wind light, snow thin, canopy stable. Bells rang with gentle music, a sound that felt both old and newly balanced. Santa followed the compressed route plan. The elves had staged deliveries by region and time zone. The plan flowed like a river that had been carefully dug. As they crossed into the first dense cluster of homes, Santa did what he always did. He became quiet, not because he was sad, but because he listened. He listened to the air, to the reindeer breath, to the tiny shifts in wind. He listened to the world below, where lights glowed in windows and roofs held snow like soft blankets. He reached back, opened the first crate with the practiced motion the rehearsal had trained into him, and took a bundle of gifts. He moved quickly but gently. Roof after roof, chimney after chimney, window ledge after window ledge, he delivered. The old magic was still there, steady as a heartbeat. It did not need flash, it did not need extra loops. It needed calm. The reindeer kept pace, moving through the night with a rhythm that felt like trust. Hours passed, measured not by clocks but by the shift of stars and the pattern of light below. Then the weather tried to make a point. A band of slushy air arrived without drama, which was worse. It was a thin, cold wetness that clung to the canopy and turned the air heavier. Not a storm, just an insult. Santa felt droplets tap against the canopy. The sound was soft but persistent. Blitzen snorted. Slush. Donner shifted his shoulders. "I dislike this." Santa held the reins steady and listened. The canopy held. The ties stayed tight. The sleigh responded a little slower but stable. Aino's voice came through the charm. Calm. Rain band detected. Alternate lane recommended. Santa answered, taking alternate lane. Rudolph adjusted course. The sleigh rose slightly, shifting into a higher air layer where the cold turned moisture back towards snow. The tapping softened. The air became cleaner, Santa exhaled slowly. Good, Rudolph called back. Calm. Santa nodded. Calm. They continued. The compressed plan worked. The staging system reduced pauses. The crate access was smooth. The rest windows arrived like small islands of relief. At the first rest window, Santa guided the team to a quiet, high-altitude corridor where the wind was minimal. They glided in a steady line while Santa opened the snack crate. Carrots were distributed with great seriousness. Warm water was offered. Santa took a sip of cocoa and let his hands relax. Rudolph looked back. "You are doing it," Santa nodded. "I am doing it." Rudolph's voice was gentle. "Do not tighten." Santa smiled faintly. "I will try not to." The night continued. They crossed coastlines and mountains. They skimmed above seas dark as ink. They passed above cities where lights stretched like constellations made by humans. Over Norway, Santa saw the familiar outline of the coast and the cold sheen of water. He saw Oslo glow, quiet and steady, pressed against winter. He remembered the letter wishing him cocoa and not cold wind. He whispered, for no one but himself, "Thank you." He delivered quietly across rooftops dusted with snow. The wind near the water shifted, but Rudolph guided them through with calm precision. The alternate lanes kept them away from busy air. No drones interfered. The night remained mostly theirs. There were small mishaps, because life insisted on being life. A cookie left on a windowsill was slightly too soft. Santa ate it anyway and pretended it was intentional. A chimney was narrower than expected. Santa did not force it. He used the window ledge instead, because the goal was joy, not stubborn tradition. A gift bundle slipped from his glove and landed gently in fresh snow. Santa retrieved it, shook it off and placed it properly. No drama, no heroics. At some point, the canopy tie made a noise that sounded suspicious, and Santa felt his mind try to sprint into panic. He stopped. He breathed. He checked the tie. It held. He heard Rudolph's voice in his memory. Trust the whole thing. Santa trusted. The tie stayed, the reindeer flew steady, the bells rang balanced music through the cold. The night moved toward its far end. By the final segment, Santa felt exhaustion in his bones, but it was the clean exhaustion of effort, not the stale exhaustion of dread. He had done it with the team, he had kept promises, he had taken rest windows, he had avoided unsafe weather, he had not tightened until he crushed the night. The last deliveries were always strange, not because they were harder, but because the end of the night carried a quiet sadness. Even after centuries, Santa still felt it. The moment when the last gift left his hands. The moment when the job, for 1 year, was complete. He placed the final gift with care, adjusted a stocking that had slipped and paused for a heartbeat in the soft glow of a living room tree. He did not linger, he did not add flourishes, he simply stood, calm, and listened. Somewhere in the house a person breathed in sleep. A small dog shifted and settled. The air smelled faintly of pine and sugar. Santa nodded once, as if thanking the room for letting him do what he did. Then he left quietly. Back in the sleigh, Santa took the reins and spoke softly to the team. Home. Rudolph's nose glowed brighter, and the reindeer turned toward the North Pole. The return flight felt lighter, partly because crates were emptier, partly because the weight of expectation had shifted into the past. The North Pole appeared ahead, lights glowing warm against the dark. They landed in the yard with smooth precision. Elves rushed forward, cheering quietly, careful not to frighten the reindeer or wake the sky. Ino was there, clipboard in hand, face calm and triumphant. Operation complete, Ino said. Performance exceeded target, issues minimal. Reindeer satisfaction appears acceptable. Blitzen snorted, acceptable. Donna nodded, acceptable. Cupid asked, snacks. An elf handed over carrots as if presenting medals. Rudolph stepped forward and looked at Santa. You kept your promises. Santa felt his chest loosen in a way that almost hurt. I did. Rudolph blinked slowly. Good, now you rest. Mrs. Claus approached, scarf in hand, eyes warm. You did it, she said. Santa nodded. We did. Mrs. Claus touched his arm lightly. And now? Santa looked around at the yard, at the workshop, at the team. The elves were smiling, the reindeer were being praised and fed. The operation was winding down like a machine easing into quiet. Santa took a slow breath and felt something rare. Space. He turned to Aino. The operation can stand without me for a day. Aino nodded. Yes. We have a post-flight checklist, but we can manage it. Santa smiled faintly. Of course you have a checklist. Aino allowed a small smile. Of course. Santa looked at Mrs. Claus. I am going. Mrs. Claus nodded. Go. Santa walked into his office briefly, not to read letters, not to check reports, not to stare at the calendar. He walked in to pick up his notebook. He opened it and looked at the words he had written. Myra, Bari, beach. He smiled, then closed it. The next part was not complicated. He did not need charts for it. Later, when the first pale light of morning touched the edge of the sky, Santa found himself far from the North Pole. Not instantly, because even magic respected the need for transitions, but smoothly, like the world had opened a door. Warm air touched his face. Real warm air, not indoor warm. The sound of water reached his ears, steady and calm. He stood on sand. It was not dramatic. It was not crowded. It was quiet, a simple shoreline with gentle waves and pale sunlight. Palm leaves moved slowly above, rustling like a soft lullaby. Santa took off his coat and set it on a chair. He sat down with a small sigh that was not measured by anyone. A cold beer appeared in his hand, simple and honest. The kind of drink that did not ask you to be magical. Santa stared at it for a moment, then laughed softly. Of course. He took a sip. It was cold, bitter, and wonderful. He leaned back and let the sun warm his face. For a while, he did not think about letters. He did not think about weather. He did not think about drones or schedules or clip alloys. He did not think about canopy ties or bell balance. He listened to the sea. He thought, briefly, of Myra and Bari, of coastlines and history, of a man who had once given quietly without becoming an operation. He felt gratitude for that reminder. Then he let the thought go. The beach did not demand meaning. The beach offered rest. Santa closed his eyes. He felt gratitude for that reminder. The world can wait for one more day.